Funding for this podcast is provided in part by the IPM network through USDA NIFA and various commodity groups.
The I See Dead Plants podcast shares the stories of people and plants, pests and pathogens, and the conflicts among them. Join us as we speak to the folks who attempt to solve complex problems with plants through pest management research. I See Dead Plants is an extension-based podcast created by the Crop Protection Network and the North Central Integrated Pest Management Center. Music written and recorded by fellow plant pathologist Sean Toporek and hosted by Ed Zaworski.
Welcome back to the I See Dead Plants podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ed Zaworski. Today, I've got another special one. They're always special, but this one, I got Fernando Garcia-Bastidas, all the way from the Netherlands today. And you might, I've told a lot of people about this recording, my coworkers, my wife. And when I tell them that I'm interviewing somebody from the Netherlands, and then I tell them when we're talking about bananas, they're a little bit surprised. So,
indeed,
Fernando is a banana expert, and we're going to be talking about bananas and the notorious pathogen banana wilt or Panama disease. But as always, before we get into that, we're gonna do a little bit of introduction on Fernando, get to know him a little bit. Fernando got his master's in biotechnology at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and then he got his PhD at Wageningen.
He said
Wageningen.
He said,
oh, okay.
Like that.
I knew I was gonna. And he got his degree, his PhD there in experimental plant sciences, and he's currently the head of the yellow-A breeding banana program at KeyGene in the Netherlands, and he's got a heck of a social media presence. He goes by Dr. Banana on several accounts. He's got a podcast. Make sure you check all that out, folks. But Fernando, I like to ask some get to know you questions up front here, so I kind of wanted to ask you first off. I know this is probably a good story, but I wanted to ask you, how did you get into plant pathogens and bananas in general?
Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you. I'm very honored to be in your podcast. So, how did I get into plant pathogens? I think that brings me back to my time at university, my bachelor's, when I was studying agronomy. That's 2000, 2001, 2 probably, when for the first time, I studied microorganisms. That was like another world for me. I immediately got surprised and super curious and to understand how diseases work in plants, how they spread, how they can affect the life of the plants. So that was the very beginning of that, and after that I just fell in love with this topic in different crops.
Did you have an affinity for bananas before all that, or was this kind of happenstance?
Yeah, not at all. No. I was my whole life, because I'm from Colombia, for people to know. So my first love, I always say that it was coffee. So I always wanted to work on coffee because my family had a little farm with coffee, and coffee for me was always very, very nice. So the plant, the system, I love coffee as a drink. So for me, coffee was the best, and I wanted to study and to work in coffee. So I did everything as possible to do it. I did it for almost 10 years. But then I wanted to study, to continue with my PhD, and for some reason, destiny, or call it wherever you want, it was not possible for me to continue on coffee. I thought I was quite close to go to France to see that, but it didn't happen. And then suddenly I had the great opportunity to start on banana, and after a few months, I fall in love with bananas.
So I wanted to ask you, Fernando, like I said, Fernando's got he's on several social media platforms under the alias Dr. Banana. How did that come about?
Let's say partially. It had a kind of evolution. So I was very passionate also to to show what we were doing with Fusarium and bananas. So I was called by people at the University of Wageningen in different ways, banana guard. Bananas were a novelty at university. As you mentioned at the beginning, bananas in the Netherlands, we have them in the greenhouse, and I was the expert of banana at that time, becoming like, I didn't know anything, to be honest, at that time, but people thought that I knew everything about bananas because I started to promote that on social media. So people started calling me like Banana Man, Banana Guard, Mr. Banana. I have to admit that was very embarrassing at the beginning. I didn't like it because it was in the street, this small town where I live, and in the streets were, hey, Banana Man, Banana Man. But at the end, I noticed that was something cool. And naturally, when I finished my PhD, people started to call me like Dr. Banana because of the title of the PhD, but also because I was trying to cure or to understand this disease that was affecting bananas. So that was the story of the Dr. Banana.
Fernando, what brought you to the Netherlands specifically? Was it that pursuit of coffee, or, well, you said that would have been France, but what brought you to the Netherlands?
It's a very interesting story because, in Colombia, we are very much let's say, influenced by the United States. So by America. So I wanted to go to do a PhD in the US. That was my initial plan, my whole time at university. But then when I entered in the job market, I was a researcher on coffee, and everyone who studied or who was my supervisor, boss, or wherever, studied in Europe, in France, in different countries. And then my boss was trying to bring me to France, but for some reason, funding, things like that never happened. So at some point I said that, I cannot wait anymore. I will start looking for opportunities. And I was very lucky that at that moment I was doing my master's in biotechnology. And one professor in this university knew the professor here in the Netherlands, and he put me in contact. They were looking at a profile like me, so a person with knowledge on plant breeding, pathogens, but also a lot in molecular biology. And I applied, and I was one of the chosen to be part of this big program in banana in this university in the Netherlands.
One more before we get to the main event and talking about bananas. I just was curious, as far as, for those who aren't familiar, what is done at KeyGene? Is it a big facility that works on plant breeding in a lot of facets, or what is it?
It's a very particular company because at KeyGene is a company of innovation. So we develop technology. So there are a couple of examples where we actually do breeding. One is banana, which is a project, and there is another one. But mostly our endeavor is to develop technology to support breeders. So we develop at KeyGene, the AFLPs were developed, for example. We invent technology, then we sell it to the companies, and then we start again. So that is a very unique system. We don't sell anything. We just provide knowledge, innovation.
Gotcha. And with bananas specifically, what are you doing at KeyGene?
So bananas as I mentioned, is a very special project. It's a project which was created by KeyGene, University of Wageningen, and Chiquita to develop a breeding company to solve the Fusarium wilt problem. So the idea is to develop new varieties of bananas. So in this specific project, we are actually doing breeding, developing varieties.
Man, I'm excited to talk about this because that's I won't get ahead of myself. But so I'm really excited. So this idea for a podcast on banana wilt has been something that's been tumbling in my brain for a while, and I've just kind of been waiting. And I've actually been aware of Fernando's social media platform for a while, and I kind of just I tell people I have to work up the confidence to contact people, especially somebody that I consider you pretty high profile, Fernando. I mean, you're like you're pretty close to a celebrity in this field, I'd say. So,
thank you very much.
But so the thing I want to start off with for people who don't know about bananas and Panama disease is I want to start off with the the history of this Panama disease specifically. So, but I think in order to get into that, we have to talk a little bit about the banana itself. So I wanted to ask you first,
Yeah.
where did the banana originate?
That's a very nice question because most people in Europe or in in America, specifically in the United States, think that the bananas come from Latin America because if you go to the supermarket, you see the stickers of the bananas is always either Colombia, Ecuador, Costa Rica. So for many years, people thought that the bananas originated in Latin America, but that's not the answer. The answer is actually Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea. This is the place where the banana originated, and from there it spread around the world. It's important to say that Latin America make it popular, but for the whole globe, but originally comes from Southeast Asia.
So how did it become such a popular staple crop?
It's it's a lot of answers. There are many sides of the story, but I would say first of all because it's a great fruit, so it's unique. It's the perfect fruit with a nice package, no seeds, which make difficult the breeding. It's very nutritious. It's relatively easy to grow, easy and cheap to grow for the companies. So the export systems early in the 19th century was the main driver of making bananas so popular because of they started to grow bananas in the tropics and then exported to the whole globe. So that's why it became so popular.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. I think I was talking to my wife and I was saying it's amazing to me that bananas are grown in a relatively small footprint around the world, and yet they're supplied. I was saying in the U.S. you can go in any grocery store on any day and there's bananas there, and it's kind of amazing.
There's always bananas.
Yeah. So when did we first start seeing Panama disease or Fusarium wilt?
That was in, let's say, there also here is a little bit complex the question because the Panama disease is a disease caused by a fungus that's called Fusarium. And the first, we can, just to make the story short, is that we have two versions of the Panama disease. Like the first one that was caused by the race one, which completely make one of the varieties extinct, commercially extinct, which was the Gros Michel. And that was originally observed in Australia first, also in the early 19th century. And then the tropical race 4 started to become more important because started to also affect the new variety that was resistant to the previous epidemic. In this case is the tropical race 4 and affecting the Cavendish banana, which is the banana you find in virtually every supermarket around the world.
I'm just curious, Fernando, does anybody know where Fusarium race 1 originated?
Yeah, we know, because already in the last, I would say there was a time which research on Fusarium stopped because of the fact that we found a resistant variety to the race 1. So research on that topic was reduced a lot and people started to focus on other diseases in banana. But in the last 20, 30 years, I would say more and more people started to study Fusarium also from the evolutionary point of view with all the genetic tools, genomes and these kind of things. And as you can imagine, the Fusarium also originated in Southeast Asia. So they co-evolved and from there at some point escaped. And because of the global trade of bananas expanded and spread it all over the world.
You mentioned let me make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. Is it the Gros Michel?
Yeah, Gros Michel, Big Mike. Gros Michel, because yeah. It's French, but there in the US, you know it as the Big Mike.
So, for somebody who doesn't know about this. Would you mind talking about that for a second and kind of the evolution of the bananas that we see in the store?
Yeah. So that's not completely solved, that mystery, how the Gros Michel arrived to the Americas, from where. But there are some theories that was first Dominica and then brought by the conquerors to America. And because it was a perfect banana also, that people claim that was, it's not true, but that is better in terms of taste, size. What is true is that it's a little bit bigger, is more rustic, so it has the skin tough. At that time, there were not refrigeration to move the bananas from one continent to another, so they just throw them in the ships and brought them to other countries. That banana was highly productive, grown from Latin America and beyond, everywhere. Um, and at some point, people started to notice that the plants were showing some signs of sickness, basically yellowing, wilting, and dying eventually. And the responsible was the first version of the Panama disease, the race 1. At some point, and gradually, that was not very fast, but in, let's say, in a lapse of, people say, 30 to 50 years, Gros Michel was wiped out by the race 1. And the way how the industry was saved is because they found another variety that was not created by humans, so it was not a product of a breeding program, it was just there, that was resistant to the race 1. So the same soils that were used to grow Gros Michel are currently being used to grow Cavendish. And Cavendish is a unique example. It's really a unique in plant pathology, you know that, because I don't know another example, but the Cavendish is already resistant for more than 100 years to that race, to the race 1. The resistance had not been broken. As I said, the same soils used for Gros Michel are used for Cavendish nowadays. But then it came the tropical race 4, and the tropical race 4 is pathogenic to that Cavendish.
So what made race 1 so destructive to the Gros Michel? Like what led up to this kind of destruction of that? Would you call it a cultivar? Would you call it
Yeah,
bananas?
it's a cultivar or a variety. I don't know. There is not the thing with the Fusarium in this case is that there is no a cure, there is not a control, not even chemical. It's a soil pathogen, so very difficult to control. I always say that it's impossible to control. You can manage it, but not control it. Once your soil is contaminated with Fusarium, you cannot get rid of it. So it's just the perfect combination. Susceptible, resistant. There is nothing that you can do. The roots are infected. It spreads very fast and also reproduces fast. So it produces a lot of mycelium, but also the spores, and it blocks the plant and just kill it.
Was there any part of like selective breeding to make this this banana for production that made it more susceptible, or was it just?
I would say partially yes. That's the thing. Another thing is that, as I said, the origin of banana, both banana and their nemesis, is that the origin is Southeast Asia. When you move this system to a different countries, different areas where you have not naturally controlled, or as different soil conditions, it was like a perfect, we say it like a broth to grow the Fusarium without any competition even.
With that, Fernando, I kind of want to. I think this is a good transition. How are bananas grown and propagated?
Propagation is the base of the disaster in this case, because we are talking about the monoculture. So bananas, clearly the commercial bananas don't produce seeds. So the only way that you can propagate them is vegetatively, so asexually. You take what we call the suckers, which are, for people are not familiar with this, are the side shoots of the plant. So the little baby plant that grow around the plant, about the mother plant, and then you take those ones and you bring them to different places and you grow them. So Also important to mention here that one of the reasons why the race one spread that fast was because at that time in the story we didn't have tissue culture, so we just used those suckers to start new plantations, many times with plants that were already infected. Nowadays we have tissue culture, so you have two options. Either, but if you have a technified farm, you buy the plants from labs. So you buy 10,000 plants from a tissue lab, you put them in a nursery, and then you put them in the field, and then just grow for a couple of cycles, 2, 3, 5, depending on the country. But for farmers, for people who are not like at that level of technification, let's say, they keep using the suckers. So it's a big risk of moving not only Fusarium, but many other diseases and also pests.
Yeah, that's something that I did not realize. I didn't realize that essentially when you have I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, essentially when you have a big plantation, you have a bunch of clones, right? So
yes,
as a plant pathologist, the warning bells are going off, right? And it makes sense as to what happens. And so I'm just kind of curious, Fernando, like when you take, whether it's tissue culture or a sucker, how long does it take for a banana to come into production, and how long does it stay in production?
Well, let's start saying that bananas are perennial crop, so you can have them forever. But of course, if we are talking about certain levels of quality and production, also this is very localized depending on where we are located. If it's Latin America, or if it's like the Philippines, for example, Indonesia. But even in the same system for the export market, first of all, when you put the plant in the nursery, they stay there for 4 to 5 months. Then you move them to the final place where they stay for another year, more or less. So let's say from the moment you put them in soil to get the fruits is around between 12 to 16 months. And then in the systems, you have one mother plant, but you also have the grandmother and the daughter. So you have, in a perfect world, 3 plants per site. So that allows you to get fruits more faster. So you don't need to wait another year and a half to get the next bunch. You harvest your bunch, the grandma dies, then you have the mother a few months later, cut it, and then you have the daughter, cut it, and then people usually start again, but they can just continue for 5-10 years.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on I'm sure this is variable depending on where you are and what type of production. What does a plantation look like? Is it, I live in Iowa, we're row crop agriculture, corn and soybeans, rows as far as the eye can see. I watched a documentary that was linked on your website that was done by Business Insider that you were interviewed in, and they kind of showed some of the plantation. But I don't know, what does a typical banana plantation look like?
So recently, actually, in one of my podcasts, I interviewed a professor, and he actually says something that is true. So he said that if you have a valley, a river, and a monoculture, you have a banana plantation. It's true. So in general, for this highly productive crop, you have that, just a big valley, hopefully with a river. The far your eyes can see is just bananas. So it's just bananas. It's a monoculture, and that's why it's so risky. You can cause this domino effect with the diseases like Fusarium. So one plant is sick, and then the next is not easy to control or to manage. So that's what you see. That's to apply the chemicals to control diseases. You do it with a plane. So it's hectares and hectares of just a forest of bananas.
Is it a pretty water-intensive crop? If you mentioned there being, rivers and valleys, I'm assuming you need a lot of water. Yeah,
they need a lot of water. Mm-hmm.
I got a couple more questions before we get to Fusarium in particular, but you mentioned we went from the Gros Michel to the Cavendish. Is there any more diversity within banana production, or is that like specialty, or what would you say about that?
Yes, this is also something that many people don't know, and actually I didn't know, and I was an agronomist because I we grew and we know some few bananas in Latin America. We have, I would say, max 10, but I learned later that there is a big diversity. There are more than 1,500 different types of bananas with
Wow.
different flavors, different taste, shape. So for me as a breeder now is really like a paradise of diversity. Unfortunately, we are used to just one type of banana, and that's the one we know how to grow. In a monoculture, it has a lot of disadvantages, but for people who are working on banana, it has a lot of advantages, which is that everything is standard. The time when you put them there, the time of harvest, the size of the boxes, everything is just standard. The moment you want to incorporate new diversity, you have to start everything again. So when to harvest, how to harvest, when to grow, how much nutrients should I apply. These kind of things are a new beginning. So since now we have the Cavendish, people don't want to change, but we have more than 1,000 different types of banana. Not all of them are resistant, of course, but at least in my studies, I found that at least 10% of that are resistant to Fusarium, but they are not ready for the market because either flavor, size, production, so they need to be improved.
Do all of those produce an edible fruit? Do you
No,
know?
I would say
No.
that a small portion of that big diversity, I don't know how much actually, to be honest, but I would say that probably 200, let's say 20% of that are wild types. So the bananas that produce seeds, the original ones, which are diploid, most of them. Banana we eat is a triploid. That's why one of the reasons why it's sterile, but the rest are all fertile, so you can use them in breeding, crossbreeding.
I'm glad you said that. Because I kind of forgot. I meant to ask you about that. You mentioned, I mean, part of the reason why these things are being produced by suckers or by tissue cultures because they don't produce seeds.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out what question I want to ask. I mean, obviously, it would be harder to eat a banana with seeds. If you've ever seen a picture, I don't think I had until I was on Fernando's website and looking at him kind of squashing through one with seeds in it. So I'm assuming they were bred to be seedless to make them easier to eat, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah,
Cavendish and the Gros Michel, they were bred to be triploid, so they're easy to eat. But
yeah. They
I
were
don't know
they
what.
were not they were not bred, so they are
Oh,
actually mutants, natural mutants. But
uh,
you are right in the sense that early humans domesticated the banana to be a seedless fruit. So early humans tried to be or diet without, let's say, knowing. They started what can be the worst characteristic of the banana, which is being sterile. Because it's good, let's say, in the sense that it's a perfect fruit that you can eat without seeds, but it's very bad for the diversity because you cannot improve a Cavendish because it's sterile.
mhm.
But the early humans selected for value, and the value for them was more food. So they started to select bananas that had more flesh instead of seeds. And with that, they selected for sterility, so no seeds. And that's why we have bananas, beautiful bananas that we can eat, but that are useless for scientists to make them better.
I wanted to ask you
Mm-hmm.
before again we get into Fusarium. You mentioned like big valley of bananas in a river valley, and you're spraying for pests and pathogens via airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Besides Fusarium, what are some of the other challenges that banana growers face, just in general?
This is a very interesting question because, of course, lately in the last 20, 30 years, we are making a lot of emphasis on two diseases, both of them fungal nature. Like we have Fusarium tropical race 4 and race 1, but we have also the black sigatoka, Pseudoscope for Figensis, also fungus, but this affects the leaves, and it's an airborne fungus. The other is soil-borne fungus. These are like the most important for the trade bananas, for the commercial bananas. But if you ask people in Indonesia, in Australia, what are your main problems, they are not going to tell you Fusarium. They are going to tell you, for example, the bunchy top virus, the blood disease, which are caused by virus 1 and the other for bacteria, for Sanctomonas. So it's depending when you ask, they have different urgencies. But let's say in general terms, Fusarium, black sigatoka, and nematodes are like the most important problems. Or
Oh, interesting. What nematode goes after bananas?
There are many amongst those Patilencus, but also the Maloidogene. So those are big problems in
Oh,
bananas.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea. I'm gonna have to look that up later because I'm a nematode geek for sure.
Oh, nice. It's a big problem. It's a big problem, and people in other countries are breeding bananas for resistant to nematodes.
Yeah, I won't get into that tangent, but I love nematodes. So, let's get into the Fusarium at this point, Fernando. So, I guess you mentioned it's a soil-borne pathogen.
Yeah.
How does this thing get around within a plantation? How is it transmitted from plant to plant?
But my colleagues and we agree that Fusarium is a slow mover. Let's say by itself it moves very slow, but it spreads very easy in 3 ways. So first of all, with plant material. So if you give to your neighbor one plant and you have Fusarium, you are also giving him Fusarium. By soil. And soil is like a big net of things you can imagine. It's like endure boots, animals, tools, everything that brings soil. That's the way, I think that's the only and the most common way how the Fusarium is spread around the world by humans bringing soil and water. So water, rivers, irrigation, flooding. This is the ways how Fusarium moves around.
Yeah, I like I was saying, I watched that Business Insider video that you were interviewed in, and I'll probably post the link in the show notes for this because it was such a good video.
Yeah, nice.
But I remember seeing boot washes everywhere. They had even constructed I forget where this particular farm was, but they had constructed a concrete path that the workers walked on to avoid putting their feet in the soil so much. I don't know. What are some of the other things, Fernando, especially with water and irrigation? What are some of the things that growers are doing to kind of mitigate the risks here?
Yeah, that's the clue now. The key, most important thing that you can do is the biosecurity. So everything that you can think that can be implemented in the farm is just necessary because the Fusarium spreads so easily. In my experience, we found spores of Fusarium in our shoes after walking just for a bit on these farms. So I don't know the name also in English of these kind of pools with disinfectants. So the workers entered only through that path. Before it was for all parts of the farm, but now they have to pass certain ways. Cars are just located at the entrance. They cannot pass certain distances. So in almost every farm, they adapted a new rule that is called you come clean, you go clean. So that's the way. And it's a lot of investment. No, as you mentioned, these constructions for workers are also built for big trucks. It's because, bananas are moved with these big trucks. So they pass also these pools where the wheels of the trucks are disinfected.
Gotcha. I forgot to ask you, like, where are the banana growing hubs in the world? But the next question I'll kind of lead into that. I mean, how did Fusarium wilt of banana spread worldwide?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think the human activity has been the major driver in this case. You see that in many countries, Fusarium appears and it was not there. So how the hell it came to my farm? And then you suddenly realize that you have farmers from Philippines or farmers from Indonesia that were from holidays and returned working on your farm. So that's the way how it moves, at least continentally. So it's humans, mostly humans, moving Fusarium.
Interesting. So somebody that was working, from another country, what, on their shoes
Yeah,
probably?
yeah,
So,
exactly.
because I'm assuming, I don't know, maybe not early on, but I mean, how much work goes into making sure that plant stock is clean? I guess, because at some point somebody had to move plants from one place to another. Is that a risk factor as far as transporting Fusarium?
Yes, yes, definitely, and especially in the case of Colombia, Ecuador, where it's everything super big, it's mostly tissue culture. But in
Mm.
areas where bananas are a specialty, like for example in Peru, it's mostly organic bananas, small farms of many banana growers. They share everything. They don't only share the river, but they also share land, the wires to move the bananas, and sadly also the plants. So they share plants, and of course, the most important message here is that when you detect that you have fusarium in your farm, it's already too late. It's not like, I have fusarium, maybe it came yesterday. No, it's being optimistic. The fusarium was there already for 1, 2, even 6 years. So to show those symptoms in the plant, it needs some time. And just imagine the amount of people that were working on that area. So the moment you find it in one place, you can assume already that it's in the whole farm.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Again,
drastic.
I keep referencing this video, so make sure you go watch it, folks. But
Hmm.
I saw, one of the images that they showed was that this farm had a fusarium detection, and they fumigated an area, covered it up with a tarp, and then they
Hmm.
proceeded to kill all the banana plants within a certain
Exactly.
radius of that small area. So it's serious,
Yeah,
serious
it's
business when that
serious.
happens. So,
It's serious. It's serious in this case because I always say that Fusarium is a serious problem, a serious disease, but it's also a social problem because it's not that like in other diseases that you find the focus of the disease and you eliminate that plant and then maybe 2, 3 around and then problem solved. No, here even if it's not detected in other plants, whenever you find a one infected plant, you have to eradicate like 60 to 100 plants around. So in some cases, that goes to the farm of the neighbor. So you have
oh,
to close the farm. People cannot enter, and that soil cannot be used for bananas anymore. So
mm.
people, a lot of people lose their jobs. They cannot enter. They cannot work again. So it's not only a disease; it's a disease that causes social problems.
I along those lines, if there's a detection of Fusarium race 4 and
Hmm.
they're growing Cavendish, are is a grower just kind of saying, "All right, I gotta move my farm," or I don't know what happens
Yeah,
next? I mean, it's a soil-borne pathogen. I'm assuming that it persists for a long time.
yeah,
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
you are right. There are cases that, or people claim that stays there for up to 30 years. So
Mm.
that soil is useless. You cannot use it for banana, and depending on the country, you cannot use that soil for any other thing because the moment you put coffee there, for example, okay, you can grow coffee, no problem, but you have to enter to that farm. You have
Oh
to,
gosh.
so you cannot enter. It's like, sorry, folks, but you cannot use that soil anymore. So in countries like in Latin America, people just lose their lands so they cannot use it anymore. They can, or they have to increase the levels of security, that they have to change the clothes, the shows in every part of the farm. But in other countries, like for example in Australia, um, I know that in some areas the government buys the farm, so to make sure that the rest of the production is not in risk. They buy the farm from this specific farmer, and then he gets the money, and then they don't use that farm anymore, or they use it in a right way. But that doesn't happen in every place. And if it's a big
Man,
multinational, they just abandon that farm and they just continue in a different place.
I think that's the first time I've heard of something like that. That you don't even want people walking on that earth at
No,
all anymore
no,
for the fear of transmission of the Fusarium to another farm, and that's
indeed.
that
It's
is a big
drastic.
deal.
Yes, yes.
Uh,
It's
hmm. I wanted to tear into a little bit, Fernando, the races. I saw
hmm
in my reading there was races 1 through 4.
yeah.
Obviously, 1 was the one that came onto the scene and wiped out the Big Mike or the
The girl,
Roche Michel.
yeah.
Did races 2 and 3 have any significance with either of these varieties of banana?
I would say they have not received the attention of the other ones because they are not uh, threaten the Cavendish. So the race two affects mostly the cooking types of banana, what we call plantains,
Ah,
blue boo
okay.
especially, but it's not that aggressive. The race three, although is not considered anymore important because there are not like evidence that existed, it affects the ornamental bananas, those heliconias, the ones with nice flowers. And the race four, is divided into tropical and subtropical. So both of them can affect Cavendish bananas, but the subtropical only when the Cavendish is under stress, like in Australia, in the south of Brazil. When the plant is in perfect conditions, that race is not able to infect it. So it's most linked to abiotic stresses, and the tropical race 4, doesn't matter where, it always kills the plant.
And as far as there's tropical and subtropical race 4.
hmm
So I guess it's more of a complicated question than I realized. But I mean, as far as let me say, just race 4 in general, I know that's gonna come with some caveats, right? Is it has it spread to everywhere that produces bananas currently, or are there places that are
No.
it's absent thus
So
far?
it's absent. So the race 1 is virtually everywhere. Everywhere where bananas are grown is there. So you put a Gros Michel and suddenly the Gros Michel are sick. But the tropical race 4 is something that we've been trying to keep restricted to certain areas, but I can give you interesting data. When I started working on Fusarium in 2012, there were only 5 countries that reported the disease. And now we have 22 countries, including the ones in Latin America. So something interesting to mention is that I became a kind of detective together with my supervisor at Backing University. So we were the ones who discovered the Fusarium for the first time outside Southeast Asia, and from there we started to track the Fusarium. So we developed a system that we call the forensic system to know also, to guess or to predict from where were the new incursions. So for example, we found that the one in Colombia, it was more related to the one in Lebanon. The one in Peru is more related to the one in the Philippines, based on sequencing and genetics. So it's not everywhere, but unfortunately in 2019, it was the first time in the American continent, in Colombia. I was one of the people who was in charge of the diagnostics of those plants. So every time there is a Cavendish showing symptoms, people either send us samples or we are invited there to collect the samples and to analyze them and say, yes, you have Fusarium, or not yet. You can be happy for a few more years or something. But it's spreading fast.
I keep forgetting to ask this, but this seems the perfect time to interject it. I mean, worldwide, where are most of the bananas produced? Is it pretty widespread, or is a lot of the production
Mm,
centralized?
if we talk about, there are two important ideas here. One is that there are countries that produce a lot of bananas, like India, Brazil, and some countries in Africa, but they are not in the market. So they produce bananas for themselves, for the internal
Gotcha.
consumption. They are not part of the business of banana. If you talk about
Mm.
that, India and Brazil are number one by far in production. But if we're talking about the market, the Cavendish market is everything mostly focused on Latin America, Central and South America. So Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Philippines, surprisingly. So Philippines, which is full of tier 4, is still number 3 or 4 in the top 5 of banana producers in the world.
Mm. So okay, so that makes sense. I guess yeah, I can totally see how those countries with huge populations, they're filling their
Yeah,
need for bananas, and then I gotcha. And yeah, I
exactly.
saw that. So in the U.S., it sounded like most of the bananas coming to the grocery stores in the U.S. were from somewhere in Central America,
Yeah,
more or less.
indeed.
And so there is race for in Central America in some places, but
Not
maybe
yet,
hasn't
not yet,
spread.
not yet.
Oh no, not
Not yet in
okay.
Central America. It's only in South America and from Venezuela. Venezuela now it's almost complete. The border is Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. In Ecuador was reported 2 months ago, more or less.
So I'm just kind of curious, when race 4 arrives in a place that it hasn't been.
Hmm.
I'm assuming it's, it being a sort of slow moving pathogen, like you say, because it's in the soil. And how long does it take? Or are countries very aware of race 4 and they're already taking precautions? But I don't know. I'm just kind of curious. If it hits a farm in a place that it hasn't been, is it spreading quickly because people don't realize it? Or I don't know what kind of happens in a new place.
Coincidentally, it's spreading. It appears every 2 years in a new country. So that's only coincidentally, I will say. Uh, but when I started working on Fusarium in 2012, there was not too much known about that in many countries. So when you ask people there about Panama disease, they say, "Oh yeah, that was a disease that happened already in the 50 years ago, right?" No, pay attention. There is
Yeah.
a new race. It's spreading, and we associate that, or we assume that is because the Fusarium was causing problems in countries that which were not important for the market. So Indonesia, China, they don't export bananas. So they were having troubles, but it was not in the media. But the moment we found it in areas where the industry is growing bananas for to commercialize it, then it was like a big call of attention. Like, hey, it's moving. It can. The story can repeat itself, like the race 1 Gros Michel, now tier 4 Cavendish. So it's moving, but let's say in the last 10 years, because of all the campaigns, researchers working on that, people became more aware of the problem, and now is really serious. So if you go to Ecuador, in the airport, you will see a lot of signs asking you, have you been in country with tier 4? Don't bring plants, clean your shoes, etc. Even, this is another interesting fact. So we have a banana meeting every year, the global banana meeting every year in a different banana country. But since 2013, more or less, when we founded for the first time in Jordan, this conference was not anymore happening in any banana country. We have all our meetings in the
Oh,
US. Just because, of course, if you bring people to Colombia from Philippines, from Indonesia, you have the risk that they can bring the disease. So this meeting that was nicely organized every year in a tropical country, it was only in the US now. Same place always. Nowadays it's again in because we know more, we have more precautions, is again happening in countries like Mexico, for example, this year. So that's the level
man.
of risk.
Yeah. Well, and that's such an interesting thought.
Hmm.
You have to have a meeting on a neutral site just in case, because I can
Yeah,
imagine a bunch of banana researchers and people that work in the industry get together. They probably want to go see somebody's facility and
exactly. Exactly.
Uh, so, Fernando, I was going to ask you about management, but I think
Hmm.
we've hit on a lot of stuff as we've been just in happenstance as we've been going here, as far as people being conscious about sanitation and kind of how it's spread. But I mean, I'm just kind of curious. You mentioned it's not a disease that you can control with chemicals. Um, what I mean, is it all about prevention, or what do people do for management?
So yeah, we have two scenarios. The first one is when your country is free of the disease. So let's say Mexico, Honduras, these countries produce bananas, but they have not reported the disease. So the main efforts are focused on preventing that the disease enters, and that's a lot of biosecurity, teaching growers to make the how do you say, the conditions more serious and clean, to not let people come to your farm, for example. uh, it's basically that. And in countries where you have the disease, is the main objective is to keep it contained in the area where it was found. So
Hmm.
just keep it there, don't let it escape, and start also making strong the security, the biosecurity measurements, improve the management of the farms, and very important, early detection. So we also developed the molecular diagnostics at Wageningen University. So now all the organizations of plant security in each country are doing that standard now, taking samples, analyzing in the lab, checking that you are free of disease. The moment you find it, you go to the second scenario, and then you have to just maintain the disease as as close as possible and not let anything go.
I can't believe I made it this far into the podcast without asking this, but that I'm glad you said that, because about the diagnostics, because I was
Hmm.
thinking to myself, I never asked you, and we should introduce to my audience, what does it do to the plant? What happens to the plant when it gets infected with Fusarium?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So the we call the disease Panama disease, but as you can imagine, people from Panama are not very happy that we call it like that. So the official name of the disease is Fusarium wilt, because it causes wilting, and that's because the Fusarium interacts with the roots. The roots produces some exudates that calls the attention of the pathogen. In this case, they attach to the root, they germinate, penetrate the roots, and then when they are in the vascular system, they just block the vascular system, making that the plant gets wilt because they cannot take nutrients or water. And then eventually, the main symptoms that you see is the yellowing of the leaves. Sometimes you see the splitting in the cell stem, and eventually the death of the plant.
Hmm.
So
There you go,
basically,
folks.
what you see is among those green, nice plantations, you see these yellow plants, and that's the sign that you have Fusarium.
I got so excited about the history and everything else, I forgot
Yeah,
about the
I,
the
I
main
love it.
event. Why do the plants die? What happens to them? Fernando, so obviously the management is pretty limited for this one, because there's not
Yeah,
much you can do with the soil-borne pathogen. It's a fast acting
actually,
pathogen.
there are a lot. Actually, there are a lot of things happening in research. So there are a few
Yeah.
ways to manage the disease. Like from the biological point of view, there are some microorganisms that you can see that have a detrimental effect on the pathogen. But
Mm.
that works very well in the lab. But when you bring those things to the field, it's impossible, because the Fusarium is such a difficult pathogen. It goes up to more than a meter deep. There is not a product that goes that deep. Not also other microorganism doesn't work very well in the field. Is many ways. I am probably unbiased here, but the only way to really solve the problem is with new varieties. As
Mm.
Cavendish did it for the race one, we need resistant varieties to tropical risk for.
So yeah, so that's the perfect segue. I mean, so what you're doing at KeyGene, and I'm sure what other people are doing around the world, is essentially, well, I guess, yeah, I have no idea. What are people trying to change Cavendish? Are they trying to come up with a new variety entirely? Are they trying to bring back Big Mike and Gros Michel? yeah. What's
Yes.
going on around the world?
I would say there are, if we talk about letting apart all the biological, the chemicals, if we talk
Sure.
about the genetic control, talking about breeding, there are only three ways to do it. One is like the use of existing material. So we can do screens and see what is resistant and try to replace it, which can happen, like in the case of Cavendish. The second option is the conventional breeding, which is the part I'm working, which is create new bananas by using the natural diversity of bananas, using pollen, making crosses, selection for resistance. And the third group is the unconventional breeding, which involves gene editing, transgenics, and soma clones. So there are a few groups around the world, no more than 5, working on solving the problem of Fusarium by creating two things. One, creating a new Cavendish, which in our view is not the solution because you are just postponing the problem. And the other group is to create not only one Cavendish, but multiple, and incorporate new diversity in the market. So that's what people are doing currently. So some people are trying to fix the Cavendish, and some people are trying to develop new Cavendish type of bananas.
I instantly think of a couple of challenges that I'm sure that you guys face, but I don't know what, I mean, I'm assuming you have to think about the consumer at the end of the line here for as far as what is produced, because my brain instantly goes, all right, if you're doing gene editing or genetic engineering, you probably have resistance from certain people that they don't want, a gene edited or genetically engineered food source.
Exactly.
And then on the other side, I can envision people saying, or people having challenges. You mentioned coffee, and I did a podcast on coffee ages ago, as far as people want that certain flavor profile, and getting away from that is not something that growers want to do. So I don't know, what are the challenges that you face in that regard with breeding or engineering?
You're right. You already gave the answer. So if you're talking about the use of biotechnology, either transgenics or gene editing, the main problem is the acceptance of the people and the producers. So you can develop a banana that is transgenic, already exists actually in Australia, but if you grow it in Latin America, are Europeans willing to eat it? I don't think so. In the other hand, you have the traditional breeding, which takes more time in theory, because in both ways takes a lot of time. But at the end, you will have something that probably is not as close as the other techniques to get into the Cavendish type of banana in terms of production, flavor, size, because by breeding in the conventional way, it takes you a lot of more roads to get into, and that's translated in time to get into a nice similar to Cavendish crop. So in both cases, you have a lot of bottlenecks. In the conventional breeding, of course, we have the fact that Cavendish is sterile. So we are taking some shortcuts by going to the ancestors of the Cavendish. So we are working on diploid level, which allows you to make crosses and then make the diploid into a triploid like Cavendish to improve the production, things similar to what is a Cavendish is at the end.
Are there any efforts? I'm assuming, again, I talked to somebody about apples one time, and he was mentioning that like an apple in the store, it has to be perfect. It has to look a certain way. Otherwise, people aren't going to buy it. Are there any efforts to ditch Cavendish altogether and produce a a different type of banana? I'm assuming that would be like a
Yeah.
marketing nightmare for people to try and sell something like that. But is that even a thing that's being attempted at this point?
Mm. We as scientists are always trying to advocate for that, to open the mind for the consumers to eat other type of bananas, because the big multinationals always get the same answer. Is like, we want a Cavendish because that's what the customer wants. And if I ask you how many types of bananas have you tasted, I think you will say one or two. So I think we haven't given the opportunity to the consumers to actually taste other types of bananas. I have the great opportunity to taste here more than 150 types of bananas that we have, and honestly, the Cavendish is not even in my top 100. So there are
Oh,
no, there are better bananas, of course, but they are simply not ready for the market because either they have very low productivity or the skin is too thin. The ripening rates are different. So those are things that, for me as a breeder, are challenges to try to convince our sponsors to, hey, we have more types of banana. With your power in marketing, you can actually put them in the supermarkets and convince people to try. But this is just a big dream for me. But let's see what happens. For now, we are focusing on getting something similar to Cavendish, but at the same time working on diversity.
I was hoping you'd say that. Obviously, I know the challenges, but I'm always like, I love hearing stuff like that, especially that it's not even in your top 100. What? Okay.
No,
I mean, maybe they don't even have like a conventional name, but like, what's one of your favorite types of banana then?
well, I I like the what we call the baby bananas. So these are the pisang mas, are very sweet small bananas. I
Eh,
love those ones. I love the flavor. It has a distinctive flavor like apple. There are other bananas that have a flavor like figs, like citrus. But
wow.
in my second place is always the cooking types. So I know that for many people this doesn't count as a banana because you cannot eat it raw. But I'm addicted to cooking types of bananas. I eat them
Hmm.
like almost every day.
Interestingly enough, I grew up with a friend in high school. His mom was from Colombia, and
Okay,
so
okay.
every time I was over at his house, there were plantains, and yeah,
Yes,
it's slept on. Yeah, because I mean,
indeed.
probably because it's you have to cook it, but uh,
Yeah.
those were very good. I want to get into just a few wrap up questions to start closing us out here. But before we do, obviously I forgot about the symptoms and the progression of the disease. Is there anything else that I forgot with regards to banana production, with regards to Fusarium wilt before we get into those?
No, I think for the podcast, I think this is like a good overview of everything related to banana fusarium. Maybe what you can add is in the genetic diversity of the fungus is also quite big. So we talk about
Hmm.
the races. But the races is something that we as a scientists are trying to avoid because it doesn't work as well as in other systems like tomato, for example. Here is the diversity of banana has never been tested properly, and there are 24 different types of fusarium, like genetically different, that we call the VCGs. This is for the vegetative compatibility groups. From all those 24, only one is associated to the tropical race 4, and the others are associated to race 1, race 2. But I had a colleague who did a survey on Indonesia, the center of origin of also Fusarium, and she found out that there are many more. And there are some that are also pathogenic to Fusarium, to
Mm.
Cavendish, that are not positive for the diagnostics we have. That's very scary because that gives you the idea that we have also a potential tropical race 5, for example. The diversity of Fusarium is also very big. That's important message. We have to be careful, and that's why making just one Cavendish is not the solution. We need to more diverse type of bananas. And the other important fact about bananas is that many people call it a tree. It's not a tree; it's a giant herb, and it's very special because it's an herb that gives you almost 30 kilos of food. That's also unique in the in nature. So a giant herb that gives you 30 kilos of food is something remarkable for me. Maybe those
Yeah,
are the two important facts that we can add.
I'm sure there's 100 more, but
Yeah, there are many more.
so just to get into some wrap ups, Fernando,
Hmm.
what do you? This is a hard question, but what do you think is the future of banana? This is a big sweeping question for you.
Well, it's really a difficult question. It's really a difficult question because in this world of banana, we cannot predict many things. But I'm an optimistic person. I'm sure we will be able, if it's not our group, other groups to develop new varieties. Uh, and for me, it's a matter of collaboration between science and industry to solve these big problems. Um, Innovation, try to develop new ways to improve our crops, not only bananas but many others, and very important the diversification. So I think that's a very important topic in banana. The system cannot continue like this because we didn't learn anything from the past epidemic. We are repeating exactly the same now, and if we develop a new variety, we will keep repeating the same for another 100 years. So I think it's something we need to think and to try to change. I know it's difficult, but that's our challenge.
That if you had a crystal ball, Fernando, and you could kind of
Hmm.
predict the future a little bit, or maybe just like in your opinion. I'm just curious, talking about a lot of different things, like different varieties of bananas, different
Hmm.
species that produce different flavor profiles. I'm just wondering, like, do you suspect that? Obviously, you said every 2 years another country ends up with tropical
Hmm.
race 4. I mean, do you think that banana producers' hands will be forced to something else eventually, or do you think that the knowledge will increase about preventing this thing enough to where we kind of stave off tropical race 4 in places that don't have it yet? I'm just curious. This is just speculation, right? So, folks
Yeah,
listening, this is not a.
indeed, indeed, indeed. It's a speculation because I've been giving conferences about Fusarium since 2013, more or less, and the question was always like, when is Fusarium coming to Latin America? And I said, like, I have no idea. It can be already here, but we haven't seen it because that can happen. That you have the disease, but you are not looking. You know that you have disease only when it's present in the Cavendish, but probably it was in the Gros Michel, in the plantains. And the question you made is the same. It's difficult to predict, but I can tell you that the the farmers should be always vigilant. They should train their workers to see symptoms, to act fast, to prevent that spread to other places. But unfortunately, the history says that we cannot stop. At some point, the TR4 will be present in every place in the world as is race 1 now. And we just need to be prepared, support research, try to adapt new varieties. And if you ask me how I see the future, I would like to see, for example, these huge extensions on bananas, not only with one type. I would like to see blocks of different types of banana. And who knows, maybe we can, as you mentioned, bring back the Gros Michel, grow it together, try to incorporate different varieties to reduce the spreading of Fusarium.
Yeah, it'll be knowing what I know now after doing this podcast. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in the future. I mean, we see it all the time where some sort of disaster, whether it's in crops or anything, kind of forces people's hands to make change at that point. So
Hmm.
it's kind of frustrating, I think, as scientists sometimes that we need disaster level events to enact change, but
Yeah.
it it would be interesting to see what happens. But it does sound promising to me in that there are other options. There are other.
Yeah.
It'd just be hard to get them to market because of that market recognition of the way bananas are now, right? So
Yeah,
it's
and also
promising to
for
me.
many years it was said that there is nothing resistant to Fusarium. Everything is susceptible, but nobody even take the time to actually test So we did it for many years back in university, and we found that at least from all the diversity of bananas that we tested, approximately 13% was material with potential resistance. And I've been privileged to continue on this research and using those plants in the breeding program. So that's it's nice. So something important also to mention is that in banana, different to many other crops, because banana is quite important, but we don't know too much about the genetics. We don't even know the resistant genes in banana being so important. So it's important that we trust the scientists and that we keep learning more about the crop. So that's important.
Yeah, you mentioned, what everything that we're learning about the pathogen from a genetic standpoint, and probably the same on the side of the plant, right? So that's
Yeah,
something that I get really excited about in doing all these podcasts, is hearing people talk about just the rate at which we're learning about things because of the genetic tools that we have now. It's
yeah,
like nothing we've ever experienced in the past. We can learn so much about, you know,
exactly.
phylogenetic trees and how things are related, and it's a cool time to be a scientist
Absolutely.
or be following the science. So
Absolutely.
with that, Fernando, this is the question that I always ask since I started this podcast. But I wanted to know, like, what do you think a member of the public from anywhere around the world should know about Fusarium wilt in specific? And I like to frame it up as my mom lives in Chicago. Basically, she lives in
Hmm.
Chicago. I mean, for me personally, I've never been around a banana plant. It's like you could lump a lot of people into this, but for somebody who has never been around a banana plant and just goes to the store, they're there. What do you want them to know specifically about this? What would be your message to them?
Well, first of all, that we take bananas by granted. So we go to the supermarket, usually very cheap. You grab them, bring them home. Some of them survive enough to become a bread, but in general, we don't pay too much attention that this is a crop that because of the disease, it has the potential to disappear. It's not like it goes to be extinct, but it can be commercially extinct, like it happened with the Gros Michel. So the TR4 has that potential to make that banana consumers might have to pay more to get a banana, or at some point it will be just very difficult to find in the supermarkets. So we have to acknowledge the growers, the scientists that are working to maintain these bananas in our shelves in the supermarkets. So it's very complex system. It's a plant that sterile, a plant that is very susceptible to this disease. At the moment, if the problem goes out of control, there is nothing that we can do because there are no replacements. So if you say like, oh no, no problem, Cavendish is sick now, just put another one. No, we don't have one. So that's the message. So we are working, not only me, but many other scientists trying to solve the problem. And I hope we can get with something. Our ambition is, you mentioned the apples. When you go to the supermarket, you see, at least here in Europe, you have like 10 types of apples, but only one type of banana. Probably you see
Mm.
many types of bananas, but it's just because of the sticker. But all are the same. So it doesn't matter the sticker, all are the same kind of this type of bananas. So the future will be nice if we can go to the supermarket and have the opportunity to choose between different types of bananas with different flavor, colors, taste.
Man, that would be amazing. Yeah, I had never thought of that juxtaposition, how you see a lot of types of apple, but just one type of banana.
Hmm.
So that's a good call to action. If anybody's listening from who's not a
Indeed.
scientist, like, man, I don't know who you gotta rattle the cage of, but it'd be great to see some different types of bananas, and don't take them for granted. That's
No.
such an important message. I think bananas in particular are, I don't know if they're just they're it's a great way to get it in front of people, right? Not every crop has that same recognition. It's on every
Indeed.
store's shelf,
Yes.
and we're taking it for granted because, like you said, it could. I mean, probably not, over the course of maybe 1
Yeah,
year, but it could very rapidly go away.
definitely. Yeah.
So, well, Fernando, this has been awesome. Oh man, I could probably talk to you for 2 more hours, but
Same.
just to wrap it up, I like to leave time here at the end for acknowledgments. And I know you have a lot of inputs that are, social media places that you could refer people to. But yeah, at this point, Fernando, I'll leave it up to you. Point people to any resources, any social media platforms. I know Fernando has a great podcast that I've listened to several episodes of called Unpeeled with Dr. Banana, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
go
thank
for
you.
it, Fernando.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. I love meeting enthusiastic people like you, especially with also a scientific background. It's always makes things a little bit easier. I love this setting to a nice, relaxed conversation to let people know. I try to be a little bit simple so everyone can understand also without the scientific background. Well, I can acknowledge the people in my team, especially for all the work that that helped me to do in trying to breed a new type of banana, the Yellowway company, and KeyGene, of course. Yes, if you want to know more about bananas, you can follow me on social media. Usually, I use my handle that is Dr. Banana Garcia. You can find me in Instagram, and recently I restarted a podcast, Unpeeled with Dr. Banana, where I invited also scientists, artists, chefs to just discuss about culture, and if we can talk about science and bananas, that's a plus. Thank you again for the invitation.
Perfect. Make sure you check him out, folks. I follow him. I really enjoy his stuff, and that's how we got here. So, folks, I hope you learned a ton about bananas today, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
I See Dead Plants bridges the gap between plant science research and the impact it has on our daily lives. It is brought to you by the Crop Protection Network and the North Central Integrated Pest Management Center, which are both partially supported by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. For more information on today's topic or other pest management issues, check out our show notes, cropprotectionnetwork.org or ntipmc.org. Remember, this information is for entertainment purposes only. The statements made in this podcast should be interpreted within the limited context of the particular topics being discussed. Contact your state extension program for local information on pest management. For the full non-discrimination statement or for accommodation inquiries, go to cropprotectionnetwork.org/about. Thank you for listening to I See Dead Plants.